In the Old Testament book of Nehemiah, the prophet proclaimed, "The joy of the Lord is your strength." A Time for Joy is the radio ministry of Joy Bringers International Church of Everett. Stay tuned for the next half hour as we share principles for joyful living from the Word of God. And now, here's your host, Dr. Lori Greenwood.
Today I want to spend a little time talking to you about the power of grace. If we can begin by reading a short portion of a story that appears in Exodus chapter 32. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what happened to him." Aaron answered them and said, "Take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, your daughters are wearing and bring them to me." So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. He said, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and still announced that tomorrow there'll be a festival to the Lord because it was a feast day. But so the next day the people arose early and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings, and afterward they sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. And the Lord said to Moses, "Go down, because your people whom you brought out of Egypt have become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them and have made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. They have bowed down to it and sacrificed to it and have said, 'These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt.'" Now, I'm kind of curious about how an event like this occurs, because the children of God are only, 10 days out of their place of bondage. It's about a 10-day walk. And so, just 10 days ago, they're witness to these strange signs and amazing miracles. Less than 2 weeks ago, they saw the mighty hand of God confound the most powerful empire in the ancient world, and it makes me wonder, why then, just 10 days later, has a substitute golden god, a hunk of metal with no power? Why? Why have they settled for this arrangement? Have you ever thought about it? And I submit to you that even before Israel crafted and worshipped the golden calf at the foot of Mount Sinai, they fell from grace. In other words, they failed to latch on to the power of grace. And I mean that in the truest and purest and most theological sense. Consider this. When God brought Israel out of Egypt, there was no law yet. No laws. They did not yet receive the 10 Commandments. And along the way out of Egypt, they got angry with God and they complained to God about everything that came up. For example, they cried to God about being, first of all, pursued by their enemies. And we can read about that. Exodus 14:10. "And when Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. So they were afraid, and the children of Israel cried out to the Lord. Then they said to Moses, 'What? Because there were no graves in Egypt? You've taken us out here to die in the wilderness? Why have you so dealt with us to bring us up out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we told you in Egypt, saying, "Let us alone that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would be better for us to serve the Egyptians than we should die here in the wilderness." And Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall see again no more forever. The Lord will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace." And the Lord said to Moses, "Why do you cry to me? Tell the children of Israel to go forward. But lift up your rod, stretch out your hand over the sea, and divide it. And the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea." So we know that. The first thing they start crying about is, "We're being chased, and we don't like it, God. We don't like it, Moses." And so God, just because he's God, makes a way. And they go through, and on the other side of the sea, they're okay for a little while. They're okay. Actually, they're pretty happy. They're more than content. They're a little excited. They even sing a song that Miriam wrote. But then they complained again about thirst. And we can read about that, Exodus 15:22. "So Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea, And they went out into the wilderness of Shur, and they went 3 days into the wilderness, and they found no water. And when they came to Marah, they could not drink the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. And the people complained against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" So he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree. And when he cast it into the waters were made sweet. So they complained at the Red Sea. God brought them through it. They complained when they got to Marah. God gave them a solution, and they were okay again for a little while. In fact, God even made a promise to them here that he would not put on them any of the diseases of Egypt, that he would be their healer. But, just a few hours later, they complained again. And this time they complained about hunger. And God sent manna from heaven. We can read about that in Exodus 16 from verse 3. And the children of Israel said to them, "Oh, that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt." They are really complaining here. "Just kill me now." Wow, listen to this. "And we sat by the pots of meat, and we ate bread to the full, for you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill the whole assembly with hunger." Wine, 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 wine. Not that we are never like that, right? But then the Lord said to Moses, "Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain quota every day, that I may test them, whether they will walk in my ordinances or not. And it shall be on the 6th day that they shall prepare what they bring in. It shall be twice as much." And so God feeds them supernaturally from heaven, and they did okay for a little while. And then they complained again because they needed water again. And at that point, God shows Moses how to bring water forth from a rock, like something unbelievable, right? So we can read about that in Exodus 17. "And the people thirsted there for water," verse 3. "And the people complained against Moses and said, 'Why is it,'" here we go again, "'you have brought us up out of the land of Egypt to kill us, and to kill our children and our livestock with thirst?' So Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, 'What shall I do with these people? They're almost ready to stone me.' And the Lord said to Moses, 'Go on before the people and take with you some of the elders of Israel. Also take in your hand your rod with which you struck the river, and go. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock in Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water will come out of it, that the people may drink.' And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. So he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because of the contention of the children of Israel, and because they tempted the Lord, saying, 'Is the Lord among us or not?'" So every step of the way, they're sinning. Because whether we're really aware of it or not, complaining is sinning. Complain, sin, whine, all the way. And God just blessed them. He just met their needs, and he silenced their cries. And do you know why? Because in this time between Egypt and up to the Sinai, God was not dealing with their obedience. He wasn't dealing with their faithfulness to him. He was simply doing something called grace. And grace is based completely on his goodness, based completely on his faithfulness. And that is really what grace is all about. And had they continued, I think it would have been a short trip to the Promised Land. They would have waltzed right in to the Promised Land by God's grace. Yet even though they were not at all perfect, because the grace was never based on their perfection. It was based on God's perfection. It was never based on their faithfulness. It was based on his faithfulness. But something happened along the way. In Exodus 19, at Mount Sinai, they did something funny. They said, God, actually, whatever you command us, we can do it. We've got this. Bring it on. Exodus 19:8 says this, "Then all the people answered together and said, 'All that the Lord has spoken, we will do.' So Moses brought back the words of the people to the Lord." Now, this is just a suggestion, but you know what I always suggest? Before you sign an agreement, before you promise something or make an agreement to do something, you should read the terms. You should know and understand what you're agreeing to. And they had not yet even heard the 10 Commandments. They haven't even heard it. And yet they've told God, whatever you command us, we got it. We can do this. And there's a few ways you could look at this. You might see their statement and think, wow, what an amazing people, telling God, we're going to obey. Whatever you tell us, we're there. We're on board. Or maybe you might see it differently. Maybe you might think it's a little presumptuous or almost arrogant. And really, right there, Exodus 19, is where they fell from grace. It's where they let go of the power of grace. And the Israelites themselves changed the way God operated by asking to be blessed according to their obedience. And while in theory this seems good, we will obey whatever you command us, God, it immediately led to other problems. And as soon as they traded God's faithfulness and God's grace for their own ability, they fell, even while professing their intent to obey. The next thing, they're in idolatry. They're building a calf. So let's back up again just for a minute to the moment when they left Egypt. Why, when they left the door of Egypt, why is it that they had no desire to build a golden calf? Why is it that when they crossed the Red Sea to the other side, they had no desire to build a golden calf? They had the gold with them from the day they left Egypt, but never considered building a calf out of it. There is power in grace. There's power in it. And in the moment that you fall from grace, sin becomes attractive. But while you are yet moving by grace, God himself is attractive. The Apostle Paul explained it this way in 1 Corinthians 15:56 when he said, the strength of sin is in the law. The strength of sin is in the law. If there are no laws given, then there's no strength of sin. Do you see the positioning they were in? Have you ever wondered about this when Adam and Eve were in the garden? How come Satan never tempted them beyond what God commanded them to do? So God commands them not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And that is the one area, just saying, the one area the devil came and tempted them. Why didn't he tempt him in other ways? I don't know. It's essentially if the devil wanted to stop man from ruling the earth, he maybe could have tempted Adam to kill Eve, or maybe Eve to kill Adam. If one of them, just one of them, could have been tempted to commit murder, then there'd be no human posterity at all. There wouldn't be a human race. But it seemed that the devil could not actually tempt them beyond the law. Let's look for a second at Hebrews 12. He couldn't tempt them beyond the command. Verse 14. Follow peace with all men and holiness. I want you to notice the order they're in. When you're following peace, a byproduct of that is holiness. A lot of times when you're trying to follow holiness, there's no peace in it. Right? You're trying to work this out in your own strength. Follow peace with all men and holiness, without which no man shall see the Lord. Looking diligently, lest any man fail of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness spring up, troubling you, and thereby many be defiled. Lest there be any fornication or profane person, as Esau, who for one morsel of meat sold his birthright. For you know how that afterward, when he would have inherited the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no place of repentance, though he sought it carefully, with tears. For you are not come unto the mount that might be touched, and that burn with fire, nor unto blackness, and darkness, and tempest. Do you know what mountain he's describing here? Listen to the description of this mountain. For you are not come unto the mount that may not be touched, that was burnt with fire, nor with blackness, darkness, and tempest. Verse 19, and the sound of a trumpet, and the voice of words. The sound of God's voice is the trumpet. So they heard the sound of the trumpet and the speaking of words, a voice that they heard entreated that the words should not be spoken to them anymore, for they could not endure that which was commanded. And if so much as a beast touch the mountain, it shall be stoned or thrust through with the dart. And so terrible was the sight that Moses said, I exceedingly fear and quake, Let me keep reading for a minute, and then we'll go back and talk about this. Verse 22. But you have come unto Mount Zion, unto the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly of the church of the firstborn, which are written in heaven, and to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits of the men made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling that speaketh better things than that of Abel. See that you refuse him not that speaketh, for if they escape not who refused him that spake on earth, much more shall not we escape, if we turn away from him that speaketh from heaven, whose voice then shook the earth. But now he has promised, saying, Yet once more I shake not the earth only, but also heaven. And this word, yet once more, signifies the removing of those things that are shaken, as of things that are made, that those things which cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore we receive a kingdom which cannot be moved. Let us have grace, whereby we may serve God acceptably, with reverence and godly fear, for our God is a consuming fire. Now, if we think about what we read, he starts describing to us in verse 18, Mount Sinai. From the moment they made this proclamation, we can do it, God, whatever you tell us, we got it. It's on us. We're going to make it happen. From the moment they did that, the way God dealt with them shifted, and the first thing he said was, Moses, when you come up, don't let anybody come near the mountain. Don't even let anybody touch it. Don't even let a beast touch it. If anything touches it, you're going to have to drive it through with the dart or with a spear. You're going to have to kill it. Did God do anything radical like that prior to them saying we will operate by the law? Oh, we're changing the operating system now? Now, for your own protection, you better not touch anything holy. It'll kill you. When we read that chunk of text from Hebrews 12, he first says, you haven't come to the mountain that was burned with fire, that we heard the voice of God talking to Moses. You haven't come to that mountain, the one that a beast couldn't even come up against, or we'd have to run him through with the dart. The mountain you need to come to is Zion. You need to come in a totally different operating system. Don't go to Sinai anymore. Don't go to the law. It's a picture of the law. The law cannot give you what you can get at Zion, which is grace. Jesus is the mediator on Zion. Moses did the best he could on Sinai. Understand that the emphasis of what is being imparted here is the power of grace. Keep a strong sense every day of God's grace and of God's love, because you can deviate from grace very easily. Let me give you an example of this. I know someone who drives like a maniac. And that same person, they make resolutions all the time. I'm going to drive better, and I'm not going to cut people off, and I'm not going to weave around people. But it seems, no matter how much that person resolves, that they're going to obey the law, that they're going to drive the speed limit, no matter how much he openly professes that he's going to obey the rules of the road, honestly, later the same day, you might see him speeding. You could even see him overtake a police car. I mean, it's just lawless. But here's the deal. The truth is that person fell from grace long before they ever lost their cool out on the road. Before they even committed the sin. They fell when they professed that they had faith in their own ability to do it. Can you see what I'm saying? And sometimes we miss this part. Trying our best to obtain perfection fails to acknowledge that He has become your perfection, that God alone has become your righteousness. Trying your best is the same as saying, I hope in my flesh. And God knows there is none. To expect good from yourself is the reason why many of us get discouraged. You can be right in the middle, let's just say, for example, you can be right in the middle of a service worshiping God and be shocked by the thoughts that can sometimes go through your mind. We're talking about the motives of your flesh, the carnality, the impulses. In your flesh, Romans 7:18 says, in your flesh dwells no good thing. God's grace is actually what keeps people on the straight and narrow. Grace is what lets you walk with Jesus. There is power in grace. You know the story when Peter denied Jesus? And that, he did it a total of 3 times. And then the rooster crowed. Here's the question. How could someone who walked with Jesus for 3.5 years, who heard his teachings, who saw his miracles, who saw his love, who saw his compassion, who even participated in the miraculous, how can such a person swear they never knew Jesus? Not just once, 3 times. That situation was not actually the problem, but it was the fruit of the problem. Because earlier that same night, in Luke 22, Peter said something. Luke 22, verse 31. Let me read for a minute. And the Lord said, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan has desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. But I've prayed for you, that your faith fail not. And when you are converted, strengthen thy brethren. And Peter said unto him, Lord, I'm ready to go with you both into prison and to death. And he said, I tell you, Peter, the cock shall not crow this day before you shall 3 times deny that you know me. Now, I want you to catch that part from verse 33. In the moment that Peter became self-confident. And please understand me, there's a difference between being self-reliant and being bold, because there is a righteous boldness that is not self-confident, it's Christ-confident. But what happened in the moment in this story is that Peter exudes confidence in self. And he holds himself to the law. I will never leave you. I'm ready to follow you into death. And there, he departs from grace. He lets loose of the power of grace. And Jesus responds to him, before the cock crows, verse 34, 3 times. Why? Peter changed the operating system. It was not based on what God could do through him. It was based on what he could do. The best confession I can make simply is, by God's grace, I will do well. Because the truth is, I cannot do it on my own. Grace trumps pride every time. New covenant teaching, it's not just motivational speaking. and it's really not like old covenant teaching. And as much as I'm fascinated with our Judaic roots of the faith and the wisdom of Hebraic understanding, old covenant teaching is not like new covenant revelation. So while I value the Old Testament wisdom, I believe that the book of Hebrews, in fact, Hebrews 8:6 got it right. It tells us something very true here. Jesus has obtained a more excellent ministry. And now he's the mediator of a better covenant, which was established upon better promises. And if I blend the law into New Testament truth, I might pull some people into legalism or maybe into religious duty. And that begins to strip the power of grace off the New Testament reality that's available to you and me. And this is why 2 Corinthians 3:2 refers to believers as being living epistles. You know, living epistles. Not everyone reads the Bible, but they might just read you. 2 Corinthians 3:5 says this, not that we are sufficient of ourselves to think anything as of ourselves, but our sufficiency is of God, who also has made us able ministers of the New Testament, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. Because the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life.
You've been listening to A Time for Joy with the senior pastor of Joybringers International Church in Everett, Dr. Lori Greenwood. If you'd like more information or want to help support this program, go to timeforjoy.org. For your offering of $30 or more, we'd like to send you 2 books by Dr. Lori on the subject of fasting. Be sure to tune in again at this same time next week for A Time for Joy.